The rain hit the windshield of the black Mercedes in a slow, heavy rhythm. We were parked outside a massive gated estate in Alexandria, Virginia. The wiper blades dragged across the glass with a sharp, rubbery squeal that grated against my eardrums. Outside, the world was cold and wet, but inside the luxury sedan, the air was suffocating. The cabin reeked of Eric's expensive cologne, a heavy musky scent that smelled exactly like ambition and new money. "Try not to embarrass me tonight." Eric's voice cut right through the low, steady hum of the engine. Dry, flat, a command disguised as a request. I sat in the passenger seat. I did not turn my head to look at him. The barometric pressure outside was dropping fast, and the ruined cartilage in my right knee throbbed in perfect time with the rain hitting the roof. Every instinct I had left from my years in the Marine Corps screamed at me to reach out, hit the door handle, and step out into the freezing downpour. To just walk away and let the dark swallow me. But 14 years of marriage is a heavy anchor. It trains you. It forces your shoulders to drop and your jaw to unclench even when your gut tells you that you are sitting next to a stranger. I reached down in the dark. My fingers brushed the cold, rigid edge of the titanium knee brace strapped to my right leg. I pulled the hem of my navy blue dress down, tugging the fabric until the metal framework was completely hidden from view. Eric caught the movement in his peripheral vision. He gave a single, satisfied nod. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, using both hands to adjust the sharp lapels of his Brioni suit. He did not want a wife with shrapnel scars. He did not want a partner who knew what the smell of burning diesel and copper blood was like. He wanted a silent ornament, a static prop to stand quietly in the background while he played his corporate games. The heavy oak doors of the mansion swung open, and the noise hit me like a physical blow. A wall of loud laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the overlapping chatter of people who had never missed a meal in their lives. I stepped over the threshold, and my brain instantly slipped into an old familiar rhythm. Autopilot engaged, assessment protocol. My eyes scanned the perimeter of the massive living room. I identified 4 exits. 2 main doors in the front, 1 service hallway near the catering setup, and a set of heavy glass doors leading to an outdoor terrace. I counted the security personnel. 4 men wearing cheap earpieces trying and failing to blend in as waitstaff carrying silver trays. Eric transformed the second his Italian leather shoes hit the marble floor. He squared his shoulders, plastered a massive hollow smile on his face, and stepped forward, effectively pushing me behind him. Within seconds, he was swallowed by a tight circle of bloated defense contractors, men with soft hands, thick waists, and custom-tailored shirts. I became a shadow. I drifted toward the edge of the room. I found a cold, fluted stone pillar and leaned my spine against it. I picked up a glass of ice water from a passing tray. I did not drink it. I just held the freezing glass against my palm to ground myself. From my corner, I watched my husband. He was holding a glass of expensive bourbon, waving it around as he told some exaggerated, chest-thumping story about government weapons contracts. He was talking about payload capacities and blast radiuses. He knew nothing about the actual devastating power of those weapons. He had never seen what a Hellfire missile actually does to a concrete building. The sheer volume of the room, the ignorant confidence of these civilians beat against my ears like a wave of useless, meaningless static. Then she separated from the herd. Marissa Hay. She had stiff, salon-curled hair that did not move when she walked. Her 3-inch stiletto heels hammered against the polished marble floor like a nail gun. She bypassed the crowd and walked straight toward Eric with the kind of aggressive entitlement you only see in these wealthy Washington suburbs. She stopped right beside him. She reached out. Her fingernails were painted a violent, glossy red. She placed her hand flat against Eric's forearm, her fingers lightly smoothing a wrinkle in his suit jacket that did not exist. Eric did not step back. He did not pull his arm away. Instead, he leaned in, just a fraction of an inch, shifting his weight toward her. From my position by the stone pillar, I collected the data: proximity, posture, angle of engagement. The intimacy level was a massive flashing red light. It was far beyond the acceptable parameters of coworkers. Marissa turned her head slightly. Her eyes found mine across the crowded room. The left corner of her mouth ticked upward. Exactly 15 degrees. It was a look of pure condescending pity. The smirk of a woman who had already claimed the territory and was just waiting for the current tenant to pack up and leave. I did not frown. I did not look away. My heart rate did not spike. I stared back at her with the dead flat, unblinking eyes of a sniper calculating wind resistance before a kill shot. Marissa grabbed a glass of pale champagne from a passing waiter. She kept her eyes on me, steering Eric away from the group of contractors. She walked him directly toward my pillar. She stopped a few feet away, swirling the liquid in her glass. She tilted her chin down at me, looking at my sensible shoes and plain dress. "Eric talks about you a lot," Marissa said. Her voice was thin and sugary. "What is it you do again?" Eric flinched. His eyes went wide. He jumped in front of the question like he was throwing himself on a live grenade, desperate to control the narrative. "She's keeping busy around the house these days," Eric said. His voice was suddenly too loud, too fast. "Mostly just resting." I looked down at the glass of water in my hand. I lowered it slowly. I set it down on the glass surface of a small side table. The soft clink of the glass sank completely under the loud noise of the party, but my spine went completely straight. The military posture I'd been hiding all night snapped into place. I looked right through Eric. I locked my eyes onto Marissa. It was time to correct the corrupted data. "Military intelligence analysis," I said. My voice was low, heavy. "Active duty." Eric let out a tight, nervous laugh. A bead of sweat formed at his hairline, catching the light from the chandelier. He waved a frantic hand at his mistress, trying to brush the tension out of the air. "Do not mind her," Eric stammered, his face flushing red. "She is just being humble." If you have ever felt completely erased by the person who was supposed to have your back, do me a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop the word SCAR in the comments down below. Tell me what city you are listening from and what time it is right now. Let me know I am not the only one fighting this quiet war. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact with Marissa. I leveled my weapon and fired. "No," I said. "I am being edited." Eric's throat hitched. He swallowed hard, choking on the sudden silence. The air in the room turned to ice. The air in the room was still frozen from my last sentence. I watched Eric choke on the silence. His throat worked up and down. He could not find a single word to patch the hole I'd just blown through his perfect, carefully constructed civilian narrative. Marissa stood next to him, her stiff curls suddenly looking ridiculous. Her smirk fell apart. She did not know how to process a target that did not flinch. Before Eric could stammer out a recovery line, the heavy mahogany double doors at the main entrance did not just open. They slammed wide apart. The violent crack of heavy wood hitting the stone walls echoed off the vaulted ceiling. The low, meaningless, buzzing murmur of the cocktail party died in a matter of seconds. The silence was absolute. General Thomas Holt walked into the room. Commander at the Pentagon. 4 silver stars pinned to the collar of his dress uniform. He did not just enter the space, he occupied it. He brought a massive invisible physical pressure with him. You could feel the barometric drop in the room. The air grew heavy, pressing down on the lungs of every person standing there. The crowd of wealthy contractors and politicians instantly parted down the middle, splitting into 2 uneven groups. They moved out of his way, purely on instinct, yielding to a predator at the absolute top of the food chain. Eric snapped his head toward the entrance. The color drained out of his face, leaving a sickly pale yellow behind. A second later, a feverish, desperate red crept up his neck. Heavy beads of sweat broke out across his forehead, cutting right through his expensive cologne. The slick, corporate dealmaker vanished. He became a desperate, scrambling amateur. Eric shoved his expensive glass of bourbon blindly into the chest of a passing waiter. Brown liquor splashed over the rim, staining the waiter's white shirt. Eric did not care. He yanked at the knot of his silk tie, pulling it tight against his throat. He pushed past Marissa. He rushed forward. He looked exactly like a starving, beaten hound that had just spotted a master holding a piece of raw meat. As he practically sprinted past my stone pillar, Eric leaned his head in toward my shoulder. His breath was hot and smelled like panic. "Please just stand still right here," Eric hissed through clenched teeth, throwing the order at me. "Do not say anything weird." I did not argue. I stepped back half a pace, sliding further into the shadow of the pillar. I shifted my center of gravity entirely onto my left uninjured leg. I rested my hands on the curved handle of my wooden cane. I regulated my breathing. I watched the theater unfold. Eric threw both of his arms out wide in front of him. He plastered a massive hollow commercial smile onto his face, the kind of smile programmed to secure a government contract. "General Holt, it is such an absolute honor to have you here tonight," Eric practically shouted. His voice cracked in the middle of the sentence. It was loud, desperate, and pathetic. The general did not slow down. His military stride was measured, heavy and deliberate. The heavy soles of his boots hit the marble with a rhythmic bruising sound. He did not look at Eric. He did not acknowledge the greeting. He looked right through my husband, treating him like a minor terrain feature. Eric stood directly in his path, holding his hands out. Holt simply raised his left forearm and brushed Eric's hands aside. He moved Eric out of the way the exact same way a man brushes a dead cobweb away from his face. He used zero effort. Eric stumbled sideways. His Italian leather shoes squeaked loudly against the polished floor. There is a specific, undeniable instinct among people who have chewed on the metallic smell of burnt cordite and copper blood. We do not need introductions. We recognize the damage in each other. General Holt stopped abruptly. He stood right in front of my stone pillar. The crisp, starched fabric of his uniform scraped together in the quiet room. He planted his boots. His eyes locked onto mine. He looked at the plain navy blue dress. He looked at the heavy wooden cane gripped in my right hand. He looked at the slight, unnatural tilt of my right shoulder, where the titanium plates held my collarbone together. He did not offer a fake, polite smile. He did not ask about the catering or the weather. There was no civilian small talk. There was only absolute, unfiltered recognition. The entire room was holding its breath. General Holt squared his shoulders. His massive chest expanded, straining the buttons of his jacket. His voice was a deep, gravelly rumble. It shattered the brittle silence of the mansion. Valkyrie. It was not a nickname. It was a radio call sign. It sounded like a combat order. The name hit the room like a concussive blast. Eric scrambled up from behind the general. His face was twisted in confusion. He was frantic. His brain could not process the corrupted data. He was desperate to cling to any fading scrap of the spotlight. "Oh, do you two know each other?" Eric stammered, inserting his useless, shaking voice into the sacred space between us. General Holt did not even turn his head. He treated Eric's voice like the irritating hum of a broken refrigerator. Holt reached out with both of his large, calloused hands. He bypassed the standard handshake. He gripped my free hand tightly between both of his. His grip was solid, grounding. It felt like gravel and steel. "Officer Valkyrie," Holt said. His voice carried across the room, projecting with enough force to press against the eardrums of every bloated defense contractor standing around us. "All of us at the Pentagon have been waiting to meet you." I watched Eric out of the corner of my eye. His face turned the color of wet gray ash. The reality was finally crashing down on his skull. The woman he had hidden in the dark corner of the room, the broken, embarrassing ornament he was deeply ashamed of, was a monument. A living monument that made a four-star general bow his head. General Holt turned slightly toward the crowd. He did not ask for a microphone. He did not ask for permission. He simply began to speak. He laid out the operations. He talked about the nighttime extractions in the dirt of Kandahar. He talked about the intelligence networks I built under heavy enemy fire. He listed the campaigns, dropping the classified weight of my service record right onto the polished marble floor in front of the civilian elite. Eric stood there, completely exposed. His breathing degraded into a rapid, wet, wheezing sound. He looked around the room. The contractors, the politicians, even Marissa, they were all staring at him. Their eyes were filled with a mixture of shock and sheer disgust. Eric looked at me. His jaw trembled. His mouth opened. He spat out a pathetic, desperate excuse for his own profound, selfish ignorance. He tried to blame the victim. The classic move of a cornered coward. I did not know." Eric stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "She never told me about any of that." I let go of the general's hand. I turned my body. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with for over a decade. My eyes held absolutely zero emotion. No anger, no sadness. Just a cold, empty void. I loaded the armor-piercing round. I aimed right at his fragile ego. "You never asked." I pulled my hand back. I gripped the wooden handle of my cane. I did not wait for his response. I turned my back to him and walked straight toward the dark hallway leading to the back of the house. The rubber tip of my cane hit the floor with a steady rhythmic thud. I left Eric standing dead in the center of the room, burning alive under the weight of dozens of staring eyes. I shut the heavy bathroom door. The noise from the cocktail party instantly cut off, leaving a sharp, high-pitched ringing in my ears. The bathroom was massive, lined wall to wall in expensive imported white marble. It looked exactly like a mausoleum. I turned the brass handle on the sink. Freezing cold water hit the porcelain bowl. I braced both of my hands on the hard edge of the counter, leaning in until my forehead was almost touching the glass of the mirror. I stared at the damage. The thick, angry, raised white scar cutting jaggedly across my collarbone. My right shoulder sat a full inch lower than my left, the result of nerve damage and multiple bone grafts. My body was a walking casualty map. I was a broken, battered thing stuffed into a perfectly tailored, sensible navy dress. The door clicked open behind me. Lorraine Pike walked in. Marine Corps widow. She did not say excuse me. She did not offer a polite smile. She walked straight to the counter, pulled a rough paper towel from the brass dispenser, and threw it down next to my white-knuckled hands. Her fingernails tapped twice against the freezing marble. "Men like your husband like standing next to a sacrifice, Kaya," Lorraine said. Her voice was completely flat. It sounded like dragging a razor blade across a pane of glass. "It makes them feel 10 feet tall." She turned around and walked out. She did not look back. The words hung in the cold air. They stripped the very last layer of cheap drywall off my failing marriage. They laid the rotting, termite-eaten wood completely bare. I turned the water off. I dried my hands. I threw the paper towel in the trash and walked out into the hall. The long corridor leading back to the main house was empty. The lighting was dim. The floors were covered in heavy, sound-absorbing carpets. My brain shifted gears without asking my permission. Civilian mode powered down. Tactical protocol engaged. My steps became completely silent, heel to toe rolling the weight forward, absorbing the impact in my hips. A ghost walking through a $5 million house. I passed the library. The heavy oak door was cracked open a fraction of an inch, just enough to let a thin sliver of yellow light bleed out into the dark hallway. Just enough to let the smell leak out. Stale cigar smoke, old paper, and expensive aged wood. And voices. Eric's voice. Husbands have a specific frequency. You learn to read it over 14 years. He was not doing his loud, booming, fake, confident contractor laugh. He was panicked. He was speaking in rapid, hushed bursts, trying to keep the volume down. I stopped moving. I pressed my spine flat against the expensive textured wallpaper. I slowed my breathing down. 4 beats in. Hold. 4 beats out. I listened. A woman was speaking back to him. Her tone was cold. Bureaucratic. Aaron Bell. Investigator for the Pentagon Office of the Inspector General. "I just need you to understand her current state." Eric's voice leaked through the crack in the door. It sounded thin, desperate, sweaty. "Kaya is not thinking clearly these days. She mixes up the books. She misplaces documents. The numbers get confused." My blood stopped moving. It turned to absolute slush in my veins. "It is the medication," Eric hissed, pushing the lie harder into the air. "Side effects from the heavy nerve pills. Severe cognitive decline. You know her file. You have seen the reports. The combat trauma. The PTSD." I stood perfectly still in the dark hallway. The oxygen in my lungs turned to battery acid. He was not just cheating on me. He was not just screwing around with the blonde out in the living room. This was a legal firewall, a federal defense strategy. Falcon Ridge, his precious consulting company, was drowning in missing funds. He was committing defense contracting fraud. The financial books were bleeding, and the federal government was finally knocking on his front door. He needed a body to throw under the bus. He needed a scapegoat. He was packaging my night terrors. He was weaponizing the chunks of shrapnel still buried in my shoulder and the screws drilled into my knee. He was taking the blood I left in the dirt of Kandahar and using it as a legal shield to protect his offshore bank accounts. He was actively setting up a decorated active-duty intelligence officer to take the ultimate fall for his sloppy white-collar theft. He was going to put me in a federal prison so he could keep driving a Mercedes. 14 years. He fed me soup when I could not hold a spoon. He changed my bloody bandages. Also, he could cash out my sanity when the bill came due. The civilian died right there on the expensive carpet. The quiet, submissive, crippled wife burned away to ash. The commander woke up. I stepped off the wall. I did not knock. I raised my right boot and kicked the heavy oak door violently right below the brass handle. The hinges screamed. A violent, ear-splitting screech of tearing metal. The door smashed backward into the interior wall with a sound like a gunshot. Eric jumped out of his leather armchair like he had been electrocuted. The lit cigar slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the Persian rug and scattering gray ash everywhere. Erin Bell froze in her seat, a legal yellow notepad resting on her knee, her pen suspended in mid-air. Eric lunged forward. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. He reached out with both of his soft, manicured hands, trying to grab my shoulders, trying to smother the massive fire he had just started. "Kaya, baby, wait, I was just explaining." I slapped his hands away, hard. The loud smack of flesh hitting flesh echoed in the sudden quiet of the room. I did not look at him. He did not exist. I walked right past him. I stood directly over the Pentagon investigator. I looked down into Erin Bell's wide eyes. I gave her the dead, flat, unblinking stare of a woman who calculates mass casualty numbers for a living. "My medication upsets my stomach," I said. My voice was a solid block of ice. "It does not affect my ability to spot a federal fraud." Erin Bell blinked. She swallowed hard. She did not say a single word. I reached out. I knocked my knuckles twice against the polished mahogany desk. A hard, hollow final sound. "Tuesday, next week," I said. A direct, unquestionable order. "You and me." I turned around. I walked out into the hall. Eric collapsed backward into the leather armchair. His mouth hung open in silent horror. He stared at the empty doorway, finally realizing he had just locked himself inside a cage with a monster. 6:13 a.m. There were no sirens, no warning. The neighborhood was dead quiet, buried under the heavy freezing fog rolling off the Potomac River. The purge started with 3 massive bone-rattling punches to the front glass door. The reinforced glass shook in its steel frame. The heavy thud echoed through the massive empty rooms of the Alexandria estate. Through the frosted side panels, red and blue strobe lights bounced off the brick walls, flashing in harsh, violent bursts. I did not jump. My heart rate did not spike. I was already awake. I stood in the dark hallway, pulling the heavy brass zipper up on a faded, frayed, olive-drab military fleece. I walked to the front door. The heavy soles of my boots made zero sound against the imported hardwood. I reached out and threw the deadbolt. Colonel Miguel Reyes stood on the front step. He held a heavy tactical flashlight, the beam pointed straight down at the concrete porch. Behind him, standing shoulder to shoulder in the freezing mist, were 6 federal agents wearing heavy navy blue windbreakers. The bright yellow letters printed across their chests read, FBI. Reyes looked at me. He did not say a word. He just gave a single, rigid nod. It was the nod of a brother in arms, a silent, ironclad confirmation from a fellow soldier. It instantly neutralized any threat directed at me. I stepped back and pulled the heavy oak door wide open. The agents flooded into the living room like a dam breaking. No hesitation. Pure, tactical precision. Heavy boots stomping across the Persian rugs, flashlights cutting through the dark corners of the house. "Federal agents' warrants, keep your hands where we can see them." Eric came flying down the spiral staircase. He was barefoot. His hair was a greasy, tangled mess pointing in every direction. He wore expensive silk pajama pants and a wrinkled undershirt. His eyes were wide, bulging out of his skull in sheer, unadulterated panic. "What the hell is this?" Eric screamed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Do you know who I am? I'm calling my lawyer. You cannot just break into my house." He lunged toward the heavy mahogany desk in the open office space. He reached out his fingers, desperately clawing for a silver laptop sitting near a stack of files. He never made it. A heavy-set agent in a windbreaker stepped into his path, dropped his shoulder, and shoved Eric hard in the chest. Eric flew backward. He hit the polished hardwood floor with a loud hollow smack, his bare heels skidding across the boards. I ignored the screaming. I ignored the chaos. I walked into the kitchen and stood with my back pressed against the cold edge of the granite island. I grabbed a glass from the rack and poured myself some tap water. Colonel Reyes walked into the kitchen. He held a thick, heavy stack of papers in his right hand. He stopped on the other side of the island. He looked at me, his jaw tight, and threw the confiscated documents down on the stone counter. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the granite made my heart skip a single beat. I looked down. It was a glossy, high-end investor prospectus for Falcon Ridge. A pitch deck designed to siphon millions of dollars from patriotic defense contractors and funnel the cash straight into Eric's offshore accounts. Right there, printed in high resolution on the cover page, was my face. It was a photograph taken inside a sterile room at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I was lying in the hospital bed. My right shoulder was heavily packed in thick, bloody gauze. Tubes snaked out of my arms. And sitting right there on the plastic tray table next to my broken body was the bronze star. I stared at the image. Underneath the photograph, bold black letters read, "Backed by Officer Kaya Hess." A sickening wave of pure disgust washed over me. He had monetized my blood. He took the cartilage I left in the dirt of Kandahar, packaged it in glossy paper, and sold it to wealthy civilians to cover up his federal fraud. My trauma was just a marketing tool, a patriotic shield to hide his white-collar theft. Somewhere in the living room, a phone started vibrating. Eric's iPhone lay face down on the hardwood floor near the sofa. The screen was cracked. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dim room, Marissa Hay. One of the FBI agents standing over Eric reached down. He picked up the phone. He did not ask for permission. He hit the green button and tapped the speaker icon. Marissa's voice blasted into the room. She was not doing her smug high society drawl anymore. She was hyperventilating. She was sobbing hysterically. "Eric, listen to me. They are already at my apartment," Marissa screamed through the speaker, her voice shrill and jagged. "I had to save myself. I gave the inspector the hard drives. I gave them the fake psych evaluations we drafted on your wife. Everything. Do not call me again. Do not look for me." The line went dead with a sharp click. The rat had jumped the sinking ship at the very first smell of gunpowder. The brilliant, untouchable alliance between the corrupt contractor and his mistress collapsed in exactly 3 seconds. Eric scrambled on the floor. He crawled on his hands and knees, dragging himself across the wood like a wounded animal. He smelled like stale cold coffee and the sour, pungent reek of pure fear. He reached the kitchen island. He grabbed the fabric of my military fleece with both hands, pulling himself up onto his knees. He looked up at me. Tears streamed down his pale, sweaty face. He started begging, emotional blackmail raw and pathetic. "Kaya, please." Eric whimpered, his voice shaking violently. "I took care of you when you were broken. I fed you when you could not move. You owe me for that. You have to save me. Just tell them you are confused. Tell them your memory is failing from the PTSD. Please, Kaya." The final rusted chain linking me to this man snapped completely. I did not scream. I did not slap his face. I reached out and gently pulled my fleece out of his trembling hands. I looked down into his wide, fractured eyes. I gave him the exact same look a firing squad commander gives a deserter right before giving the order to fire. Nothing but cold, empty steel. I took a half step backward, clearing the physical space. I made room for the federal agent walking up behind him, holding a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The living room was loud. Drawers were being ripped open. Files were being dumped onto the floor. But my voice dropped into a low, heavy register that cut through every single noise in the house. "Sit down, Eric," I commanded. Eric froze. The air left his lungs. His knees buckled under the absolute crushing weight of the order, and he collapsed onto the floor. He looked up at me and finally realized the truth. The quiet, submissive wife was dead. The beast of war was fully awake, and she was watching him burn. 2 weeks passed. 14 days since the federal raid tore through the Alexandria house. Eric was a desperate man backed into a dark corner. His massive ego and his blinding arrogance pushed him to make one final pathetic gamble. He organized a massive fundraising gala on the edge of the Chesapeake Bay. It was a desperate grab for cash, a blind attempt to drain the pockets of his wealthy defense investors before the federal indictments dropped. I showed up. The banquet hall was built to look like old money. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted wooden ceilings. The smell of roasted meat, expensive wine, and salt water blowing in off the bay mixed together in the freezing air. I did not walk into the light. I stayed in the back. I stood completely still, buried in the heavy shadows of a far corner. I held my wooden cane. I waited. At exactly 7:30 in the evening, Eric walked up the short wooden steps and took his place behind the clear acrylic podium. A blinding white spotlight hit his face. He wore a new tuxedo. He looked sharp, but I could see the cracks, the heavy sweat pooling at his collar, the slight, uncontrollable tremor in his left hand gripping the edge of the podium. He tapped the microphone. The room quieted down. He started speaking. It was a cheap, fabricated speech about duty and sacrifice. He fed them lies. He painted himself as a patriot. Then he did exactly what he always did. He used my blood to build his stage. Eric raised his hand. He pointed his finger straight into the dark shadows where I was standing. "My wife is in the back of the room tonight," Eric said. His voice carried that fake, practiced tremor of a man pretending to care. "She is a broken soldier, a woman who needs my protection after giving so much to this country." He was selling me out. One last time, he was putting my trauma on display to squeeze a few more $1 million out of the defense elite. I gripped the handle of my cane. I lifted the heavy wood. I brought it down hard against the floor. A loud, hollow knock echoed in the back of the room. I stepped out of the shadows. I began to move. My right leg was stiff. The titanium brace locked my knee into place. My steps were heavy, dragging slightly with a pronounced limp, but my spine was straight, iron straight. I walked down the center aisle. I did not look at the men in their expensive suits or the women in their silk dresses. I kept my eyes locked on the podium. The room fell dead silent. You could hear the heavy rubber tip of my cane striking the floorboards. One step, then another. The crowd stopped breathing. They watched the broken soldier walk toward the light. I reached the stage. I climbed the 3 wooden steps. Eric backed away from the microphone. His face turned the color of wet concrete. The confident speaker vanished. He looked like a cornered rat. "What are you doing?" Eric hissed. His voice was a frantic, desperate whisper meant only for me. "Get down right now. Go back to the shadows." I did not look at him. I did not acknowledge his existence. I walked straight to the center of the stage. I reached out with my left hand. I grabbed the black microphone and ripped it out of the metal clip. A sharp squeal of feedback cut through the expensive speaker system. I turned to face the crowd. Hundreds of wealthy investors stared up at me. I looked back at them. My face was a mask of cold, dead stone. I spoke with a voice that carried absolutely zero emotion. It was the voice of a commander delivering a final casualty report. "My name is Kaya Hess," I said. The sound punched through the heavy silence of the hall. "Some of you in this room know me by a different name." Movement caught the corner of my eye. In the very front row, sitting at a table reserved for the most elite guests, General Thomas Holt pushed his chair back. He stood up. He brought his heavy boots together and stood at absolute rigid attention. General Holt looked at me. His voice rumbled through the room, loud and clear. "Valkyrie." The word hit the crowd like a physical shockwave. A few men at the surrounding tables sat up straight, recognizing the call sign. The legend. I scanned the sea of faces. I tightened my grip on the microphone. "For many years, I shrank myself down," I said. My words dropped like heavy lead weights onto the tables. I made myself small so my husband could feel big. I stayed quiet. I hid my scars. I thought that was patience. I thought that was what a good wife did. Turns out it was just permission. Eric lunged forward from the side of the stage. He reached out with both hands, trying to rip the microphone away from my face. His eyes were wild. "She is not stable," Eric screamed. He spat the words at the crowd, desperate to discredit the source. "She is having an episode." I stepped back, easily dodging his weak grasp. I reached into the front pocket of my slacks. My fingers found the folded piece of thick legal paper. I pulled it out. I held it up high in the air under the blinding white spotlight. A federal court freeze order. At exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon, I said, my voice cutting cleanly over Eric's pathetic shouting, a federal judge locked down Falcon Ridge. Every single corporate account has been frozen. The money you are pledging tonight does not exist. You are funding a massive federal fraud. The air pressure in the room completely shattered. The silence broke into a violent, chaotic roar. People started shouting. Men grabbed their phones. The collective realization of stolen money hit the room like a bomb. The whispers and shouts swelled up fast, sounding exactly like a kicked nest of hornets. Eric lost his mind. He lunged at me again. He grabbed my right bicep. His fingers dug hard into the muscle. His face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. You are making us look like fools. Eric spat his breath hot and sour against my face. You are embarrassing us. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. I did not flinch. I brought my arm up hard and violently shoved his hand away. I stepped into his space. No, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly. I am introducing everyone to the real you. I dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, heavy thud. I looked down at the front row. General Holt slowly reached up and buttoned the center button of his dress jacket. He looked me dead in the eyes. He gave a single firm nod of absolute respect. Officer, General Holt said. He turned his back to the stage and walked straight toward the heavy glass exit doors. That was the signal. The domino effect triggered instantly. It started in the front rows and swept through the massive hall. The loud, aggressive sound of heavy wooden chairs scraping backward against the floorboards filled the room. Colonels, defense contractors, and wealthy politicians stood up in perfect unison. Nobody wanted to be caught in the blast radius of a federal target. The sound of hundreds of expensive shoes rushing toward the exits echoed off the vaulted ceiling. It was a mass exodus of the elite. They practically trampled each other to get away from the podium. 3 minutes later, the massive banquet hall was dead. Empty. The waiters had fled. The donors had vanished. The room was nothing but a graveyard of abandoned tables, crumpled linen napkins, and hundreds of half-empty glasses of expensive champagne. Eric stumbled backward. His legs gave out. He collapsed hard against the base of the acrylic podium. He slid down the polished wood, pulling his knees up to his chest. He sat there on the floor, totally exposed under the harsh white spotlight, completely stripped of his armor. He was nothing but a hollow, broken shell, sitting in an empty room. 3 weeks later. A cramped, drafty rental house sitting on a bleak stretch of the Maryland coast. The white paint on the windowsills was peeling off in thick, dry flakes, exposing the rotting wood underneath. The air rolling in off the Atlantic smelled like low-tide, wet salt, and dead fish. It was not a $5 million mansion in Alexandria. It was real. I stood at the narrow kitchen sink. The cheap Formica counter was chipped at the edges, the underlying particle board swollen from years of water damage. Freezing cold tap water blasted out of a rusted brass faucet. It rushed over a plastic colander full of bright red strawberries. The dark soil washed away, spiraling down the cheap aluminum drain. The burner phone sitting on the counter vibrated, a harsh mechanical buzzing sound rattling against the cheap laminate. I did not stop washing the fruit. I dried my left hand on the thigh of my jeans, reached over, and hit the speaker button. I lost my ass out there, Kaya. Eric's voice. It sounded hollow, scraped out. The feds had frozen his corporate accounts, impounded his luxury cars, and stripped his Alexandria estate down to the copper wiring. He was sitting in a cheap roadside motel somewhere waiting for a federal judge to hand down a mandatory minimum prison sentence. I have absolutely nothing. Eric breathed into the receiver. His voice cracked heavy with a pathetic, suffocating blanket of self-pity. My lawyers will not even return my calls anymore. You fed me to the federal government. You completely ruined my life. I picked up a strawberry. I pressed my thumbnail into the flesh and twisted the green stem off. You miss the feeling of being forgiven, Eric, I said. My voice was completely flat. No heat, no anger, just dead air. He choked on a wet, ragged breath. The panic fully set in. The final desperate scramble of a dying parasite realizing the host was gone for good. "I stayed with you," Eric yelled. The audio clipped, distorted by the cheap phone speaker. "When you got blown up in that sandbox, I stayed. I fed you soup. When you could not hold a damn spoon, I emptied your bedpans. You owed me for that." He was trying to cash in the receipt, using basic human decency as a leverage tool for federal fraud. He was trying to use a debt of gratitude to extort me. I reached out and twisted the rusted brass handle. The water stopped. The sudden silence in the kitchen was heavy and absolute. I looked out the dirty kitchen window. The sky over the Atlantic Ocean was a flat, bruised gray. "Love is not a lifetime immunity deal," I said. Eric stopped breathing on the other end of the line. I kept my eyes on the cold salt water crashing violently against the shoreline. "Fixing my physical body did not give you the title to my dignity." The line was dead quiet. The steel boundary was finally set, dropping like a heavy iron gate between us. Then the pathetic last-ditch effort leaked out of the speaker. "I really love you, Kaya," Eric stammered. I reached down. I pressed my thumb hard against the red button on the cracked glass screen. Click. The call died. A cold, sharp dial tone hummed in the empty kitchen. The 14-year march with a traitor was officially over. I picked up the dripping colander and walked to the small wooden table. 1 month later. The local VFW post on the very edge of town. It was an old, ugly cinder block building with a gravel parking lot. A flickering, half-dead neon sign buzzed loudly over the heavy steel front door. Inside it smelled like stale draft beer, heavy industrial floor cleaner, and burnt Folgers coffee. There were no crystal chandeliers here, no Brioni suits. Just scuffed sticky linoleum floors, cheap folding tables, and old men wearing faded ball caps with ship numbers stitched onto the front. I pushed through the heavy steel door. Lorraine Pike was already there. She sat at a plastic folding table pushed hard against the back wall, surrounded by massive stacks of manila folders. We were building a legal aid network, pushing back against the massive rusted bureaucracy of the VA to get female veterans their medical claims. I walked across the room. I was wearing a faded gray t-shirt and heavy blue Levi's. I had taken a pair of shears to the right pant leg, a clean straight slash right up to the thigh. The thick industrial titanium struts of my knee brace were completely exposed to the cold air. I did not pull a hem down to hide the metal. I did not soften my heavy limp. I walked with the uneven dragging step of a soldier who paid the ultimate toll in blood. There was nothing left to hide. I pulled out a cold metal folding chair and sat down across from Lorraine. I grabbed a stack of denied medical claims. I dragged a cheap plastic ballpoint pen across the top file. My eyes scanned the messy paperwork, checking variables, finding the weak points in the administrative defense. I was back in command. The heavy steel front door of the VFW hall groaned open. A blast of freezing autumn wind rushed into the room, rattling the cheap paper blinds hanging over the windows. General Thomas Holt walked in. He was not wearing his 4 silver stars today. No dress uniform. He wore a faded heavy canvas Carhartt jacket, worn-out denim, and scuffed leather work boots. He looked exactly like any other blue-collar guy walking in off a construction site to grab a cheap beer. But the air in the room still shifted. A few of the old combat vets sitting at the bar turned their heads. They recognized the heavy, deliberate walk, the rigid posture. Holt did not look at the bar. He walked straight past the worn-out pool tables. He stopped directly in front of my folding table. He reached into the deep pocket of his canvas jacket. He pulled out a small, heavy sealed envelope. He dropped it flat onto the stack of medical claims sitting in front of me. He did not say a single word. He looked down at me. He gave a firm, rigid nod. Then he turned around, pushed the heavy steel door open, and walked back out to the gravel lot. The loud, heavy roar of a diesel truck engine fired up a few seconds later, large tires crunching loudly over the rocks as he pulled away. I stared at the small envelope. I reached out and broke the paper seal. There was no metal inside, no official Pentagon letterhead, no civilian garbage. Just a thick, heavy piece of cardstock. I pulled it out. The black ink was heavy, written in sharp, rigid military print. Valkyrie does not retire. She just changes battlefields. I stared at the black ink. the tight knotted muscle sitting in the center of my chest for the last 14 years finally released. A slow, quiet smile broke across my face. I folded the heavy paper in half. I shoved it deep into the front pocket of my Levi's. I leaned back in the cold metal chair, closed my eyes, and took a long, deep breath. The smell of cheap, burnt coffee filled my lungs.